This is Continuum Drag, a podcast where we watch sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, the Tommyknockers, Part 1.
Should have been you, Guard. That should have been you who found it.
Found what?
I think that it was for you.
What? What was?
Well, you'll understand better once you see it and you feel it.
Hey, what do you want?
Euphoria. A miracle.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast pitching an alternative title for this TV movie, Main PD Green. I'm Luke. Here's my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
That's pretty good. I'll have to say, Tommyknockers isn't the most evocative title ever, is it?
No, it's not particularly a good title. I mean, why don't we get into this now a little bit then, is because we're watching the TV movie Tommyknockers this week, Stephen King adaptation, a real classic. And what's your familiarity with the old Tommyknockers from Stephen King?
Very little. I know of it as a title. I don't know if I even remember this TV movie being on TV. Like, it wasn't one of those things where, you know, sometimes you didn't watch it, but they like advertised it like crazy on TV back in the day. But I don't remember this at all. I have a feeling it was one of those, like, it played at like midnight or something on CTV, and I never caught it. So other than seeing it in a bookstore, I don't know anything about the Tommyknockers. What about yourself?
A couple years ago, I listened to the audiobook, possibly while I was falling asleep every night. So I probably heard like the beginning of every chapter and then not the end of every chapter. I recall like sort of enjoying it. I remember I was like, well, what's a fun like, you know, probably height of Stephen King era. Not one of his major works, but I remember it being a nicer, lesser work. Though I could be wrong. As I said, I listened to it while falling asleep. And as I recall, the Tommyknockers were mentioned very early on as like this fairy tale creatures, and I don't recall them ever being mentioned again. Unlike this TV movie where they're perpetually referring to them as the Tommyknockers. That's what I remember from the book. I could be wrong. As I said, I slept through most of it.
There definitely are some. If just on the surface level, I felt this reminded me a lot of the other TV movie that we watched for this podcast, The Langoliers. And I'm not exactly sure why. If it's not like they're that similar, but there's just a feeling, and maybe it's just like cheap TV movie feeling, but there's something I was like, this really reminds me of The Langoliers.
Well, this is just that sweet spot of the 90s TV movie, the two-parters. I mean, that's it. Like, I have them written down here, but like that's like, it was obviously the big one. It was the one everyone was excited about. But then they also did The Stand, which I think was well received. Right. And then the Langoliers came along. I think this was in that same mix. They're like, we can spend TV money to make a two-parter, put on some of our bigger TV actors, and like it's a sensation every time. Although I have a feeling, especially after having watched the Tommyknockers, it was clearly diminishing returns. I was missing the Langoliers at some point during this. I'm like, oh, the Langoliers are a lot more fun than this.
Well, I'd agree. And there's one thing that really sticks out on this as we get into it, at least for me, is this didn't need to be two parts. Or at the very least,
we'll get into it, but yeah, it's definitely too much.
Yeah, it's too much, or at the very least, it's of a time where it was more challenging for writers to know how to properly spread out this material. I think I've seen some book adaptations in the last few years that have become, you know, one and done series. They have 5-6 episodes, and I think they have fared a lot better than some of these TV movies, because at all times it feels like a lot's missing and there's way too much happening, and you're just like, oh great, another character. Is it important for this? Nah, not really.
Yeah, I feel like of the TV movies we watched, this one really, you can really sense the idea that they're like, we need 2 parts. I don't know if there's enough material here. Make it 2 parts.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Well, here's a little fun TV fact for you though, Jordan, because the entire story takes place in Haven, Maine, which is the basis of a more recent television show called Haven. I would believe it was shot out in Nova Scotia or something.
Is that right? Is that where it's shot? Oh, yes, you're right, yeah.
Which I guess was also, Haven was also, that series was based on a different Stephen King novel called The Colorado Kid. I think loosely based, but I guess this is, so it's not quite Derry, but it's the also ran of his fake Maine towns.
I was waiting for it. It was going to be my what's real, but your intro was better. he is so desperate to create a nonsensical connection between his other books. Like in this, they have to have a character be like, "Hey, that dog's crazy. He's acting like Cujo," and it's almost like you could see the actor like having a wink at the audience. You're like, "All right, Steven, we get it."
I'm not sure if that was in the original book or not. That might have just been for the TV show.
Oh, I bet it's in the book. He does that constantly in his books where it's like, I think at a certain point he started deciding there was connections, with the Stand and the Dark Tower series and all these sorts of things. You're like, okay, there's maybe something kind of interesting that you can kind of start parsing out of this weird connection. But like this sort of stuff of just referencing other books as like pop cultural references, it just feels like a real pat on the back that I find a little bit irritating.
I will say Pennywise is definitely mentioned in the book because the aliens are related to Pennywise. They're like cousins or something.
Yeah.
All right, Jordan. Well, this was broadcast May 9th and 10th, 1993 on ABC.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 1 week after the final episode of another series we have watched, the finale of another series we watched. Can you guess what that might have been? 93.
1993.
May.
Was it Vampire Time?
Well, the one we just watched?
Yeah, what was it called? Forever Vampires?
Forever Night, yes.
That's the one. Was it that one?
It's not that one.
Oh, okay, hold on. Is it, I love, by the way, that you have to speak my language, I'm sorry. Is it the one where the guy, the cop time travels?
The cop time travels. I mean, no, it's not. Whatever. A time cop? Are you thinking of Time Cop?
Is it Time Cop?
The one where the cop time travels. I wish I could remember the name. If only two of the words were in the sentence I just said.
I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry. Time Cop. Was it Time Cop?
It was not Time Cop. It was Swamp Thing.
Oh, it's funny. Swamp Thing feels much earlier. It feels like, I mean, maybe it existed its own time. But that was, I'll just say this for Tommyknockers. Tommyknockers feels young and fresh compared to Swamp Thing.
Old Swamp Thing? That's true. Yeah. That's true. Well, let's get into it. Here's the IMDb summary for the Tommyknockers, Part 1. In a small town haven in Maine, the aspiring writer Roberta, quote, Bobby, end quote, Anderson, lives in an isolated house with her alcoholic boyfriend, the poet James, quote, Gard, end quote, Gardner, and their dog Petey. Well, Gard is traveling to a poets convention. She stumbles with a green stone and becomes obsessed to excavate the object. And that was a truncated summary courtesy of Claudio from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He wants you to know he puts that in his name on IMDb.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks. Claudio? Claudio it was?
Yeah, Claudio.
Yeah, thanks. So a few things I want to start with. There's some real marks here of a Stephen King book. The first, there's got to be a writer character. So
this time.
He's done two it on this one. He's like, I'm doubling down. Also, a character needs to be an alcoholic. He was like, let's save a character, just make one of them an alcoholic. And I know I'm not being fair on all his books, but there's just certain themes that seem to pop up in his. Obviously, it has to take place in Maine. And then at the end has to be either magic or monsters or aliens, where he's just like, that's why. And this one is aliens.
I could be wrong, but I do believe this is one of the ones he does not remember writing most of.
Yeah, it's actually funny. There was I did have a quote from him, and he called it an awful book, and that he wrote it while on cocaine and does not remember writing it. And then, but this mini series is what they call it, or 2-episode TV movie. He called it cheap and thrown together, which I thought was bold of him to go, hey, I wrote a really bad book, so the source material is terrible. Then he's like, the movie bait from it is terrible. I'm like, yeah, well, it'd be pretty impressive if they made a good version of something that started out bad.
I do find it funny that he still will rag on some of these because, I've seen the movies he made and he didn't do a great job himself.
What was the one he directed? The one with
Trucks?
the
No, it wasn't Trucks. Maximum Overdrive.
That's right, which is... Yeah, that's the one with the AC/DC soundtrack. Yeah. That wasn't very good.
Oh, I do recommend, though, if you have the time, just go watch the original trailer for Maximum Overdrive. We used to have it on loop at the video store I worked at. It's fantastic. It's a bearded Stephen King, quite out of his mind, talking to the camera, describing the movie he's made.
Yeah. Anyways, that just sets the stage for what was the author's state of mind while writing this.
Jordan, not to gossip. It's a bit rude, obviously, about poor Stephen King. Lovely man, I'm sure. I do enjoy his work. I'm not.
He does.
trying to...
I will say this. He does seem like a genuinely nice man who you can't knock his work ethic. There's one thing you just have to be like, well, he keeps knocking them out. I mean, there's no small fish in the pond for him. Every idea is worth it, but he keeps going, you know?
And I've enjoyed some of his work. I
agree.
I don't qualm him at all. But I did see a very recent photo of him holding another book, not his, but he was like doing a little plug for it. Mm-hmm. And someone had noted on Twitter to zoom in on his hand holding the book. His one fingernail, the pinky fingernail, is quite long to the extent that it seems like he's back, baby.
Or it could be. I've heard that also some people grow that finger really long so they can like pick their ear. Do you think that's true?
I can't know because you would just jam your little ear thing. What's it called? Drum. There we go.
Ear Not so easy now, is it? Time cop
now.
guy.
Anyway,
so yeah, maybe he's doing cocaine. Hey, maybe we're gonna get something as amazing as the Tommyknockers.
Oh, maybe Pennywise is coming back. Anyway, Jordan, I've broken this down because it's a sprawling first part, a lot of wheels spinning, a lot of characters. So I've just broken it down a bit, and so we're going to jump all over the place a little. I hope you're okay with that.
Of course. And are you going to mention that we have 2 Continuum Drag All-Stars on this?
Oh, we definitely will. I mean, I know one, so I might need you to cue me to the other one.
Okay.
Well, as you mentioned, it's a sprawling cast of the most cardboard characters you've ever met.
And let me ask you this. Let's say you were adapting this. Don't you think your first thing you do would be like, I think I could probably get rid of the grandpa and kid characters. I could probably get rid of the whole thing of the post office guy cheating on his wife. Like, you could get rid of a lot of this, and it doesn't hurt the story.
Yeah, but where's he going to go? He has to fill an hour. He has to fill 3 hours. He would have nothing to do.
I think that's my point. I don't think you need to fill 3 hours.
He did. He contracted for 3 hours.
Fair enough.
And I know we're not getting started again. We're slowing down. I will say that the book itself, as I remember it, there are a lot of characters in it, but it was treated more like vignettes. Like, it was more like you'd get a vignette of like a character in this town as they slowly went mad. Whereas this is just like, they just picked 5 of the vignettes and we're like, it takes place over the entire movie now.
Yeah, but you make a good point, because that is really what the structure of this is. It's something you've seen a bunch of times, and maybe this is uniquely told, or maybe it's not. But it's basically, it's a small town that's sort of isolated, and something starts happening, and people start acting funny, which again seems like the beginning of probably many TV and movies that you've seen.
Yeah, it's typical inciting incident. So the first character we'll talk about here, Jordan, is Hilly, a small boy, and his loving grandpa, and his family who run a diner in the small town of Derry, Maine. And boy, oh boy, Hilly loves magic, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does love magic, yeah. Or he eventually learns to love magic through his grandfather.
And that's really most of what his character is this kid who loves magic. And then we have the Haven police chief, Meryl. She's a widow who maybe lives at the police station she works at.
Okay. This is one of the weirder things where I'm sure it makes more sense in the book, but we're going to see this. Yes.
I don't recall any of this from the book at all.
The sheriff is it's a small town, and she's clearly at work a lot, but they at one point are like, oh, let's go see her doll collection. And there's an entire room of the police department dedicated to these like old-fashioned dolls.
Well, and the room itself looks like the drawing room in an old house. So it's like you stepped out of a police station into someone's home suddenly.
And I love it because they explain it, but they don't. They're just like, yeah, there's a bunch of dolls here, and it's like for reasons later on. But you're like, but guys, why is this a thing?
She loves collecting dolls, and you're like, what?
Yeah, it's just so bizarre. There's another thing they could have just taken out.
And the only other police officer who appears to work at that station is Deputy Becca Paulson, who kind of leads us into our third major storyline about the postman, who's played by Chip Chaikin from RoboCop, our first all-star.
Yeah, that's right.
He's like the first face you see in this miniseries, and I fell out of my chair. I'm like, Chip Chaikin's here.
Well, he's not Chip Chaikin. He's Dr. Crazy Merlardo.
No, is it? I thought. Oh, is it Millardo? I thought it was Chip
Yeah.
Chaikin the whole time.
No, it's Dr. Crazy Merlardo, and it's interesting.
That's how much he lived in my head.
It doesn't matter. You got the actor right. Joe Paulson. But the other person is the person he's cheating with, which is Tracy Lords, and she was in First Wave.
Oh, that's right. She joined late. We didn't watch much of that season, but you're right. She was one of the new cast members.
That's right.
That's right. He's cheating with this. She's Haven's new post mistress, they call her, and they're very aggressively cheating in that post office. Like every time we cut back, they're just making out as hard as they can.
And it's one of the odd tonal shifts in this thing, because this is almost treated, it's almost like cartoony, wouldn't you say? Like it's one of those things where like the door closes and they both like, grab each other and start like kissing really hard, but almost like an old Looney Tunes cartoon would. Like the tone is odd for the rest of what they're trying to do, which is build this suspense, I think, or this tension. Whether it's successful or not, I'd leave it to the viewer. But it's a weird shift to have these two kind of kissing like characters from The Mask or something.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. There's a bunch of times where it'll probably come up, but like the tone is perpetually shifting, or like just so nebulous that it never really settles into anything. It'll shift from scene to scene so drastically.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say it probably was difficult for the actors because it seems like not the greatest direction was given. And I don't know if you saw this before, but on the second day of filming, the director was fired for this. So a new director was brought in day 2. Because he, as the producer said, was not filming fast enough. And I like why he wasn't filming fast enough. They decided it had to be shot very quickly.
Well, the final storyline with characters we're going to meet are the protagonists. That's what we're going to talk about next. There's CSI's Marge Helgenberg playing one of the two Stephen King surrogates, writer Bobby Anderson.
Yeah.
And, of course, her boyfriend, NYPD Blues' Jimmy Smits, playing the poet Jim Gardner.
Yeah, and I felt bad for both these actors because they both seem like pretty strong actors, but you wouldn't be able to tell that particularly from these performances. And sort of to your point, it feels like everyone is sort of zombieing through this because they don't really know what the tone is. So like it's just like she kind of starts getting a little over the top, and so does he at some points. But at other points, it seems like he's sleepwalking through it because there's just scenes that just go on and on where you're just like walking around, and I was like, oh man, this is a real waste of these two actors.
Yeah, you couldn't tell it was a difficult one where they didn't quite know where to take these characters and had no one support both in the script or the direction of like exactly what to do.
Well, and let me ask you this. First, we'll start with like as you're getting through them, Jimmy Smits' character, this guard, Jim, his whole arc is supposed to be about his alcoholism. But like, does it have any real effect?
Not really. We'll get into it, but he falls on and off the wagon just willy-nilly throughout. Like, there's no consequences. He's like, I'm drunk now. Now I'm not drinking ever again. I'm throwing this bottle against the wall. Maybe I'll get drunk again. Which, maybe that's a bit more realistic as to, like, you falling on and off the wagon. But, like, there's no drama to it. There's no stakes to it.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, and every time he falls off the wagon, you're right. There's no real consequences. And it's not like his arc is, I'm going to finally stop drinking and then I will be focused on the goal. It's like, that's not really what this is. It's like, why is he perpetually drunk and falling off the wagon? Oh, because Stephen King was. That's
well,
why.
It's funny in the course of the story. I mean, it's probably better handled in the book, I would imagine. But like in the course of the story, like he is every time he quits drinking, it's like he's just like, I gotta focus. I gotta get over this drinking habit. I'm doing it. And then like 2 scenes later, he's like drunk again. You're like, oh, but so it like really loses its effect. Like every time he's like, now I'm gonna kick it because I need to focus. It's just like, but you just keep saying that, you keep falling off the way. Like there's no dramatic stakes to it.
And on the same point, it's not like you're watching him as a character break down. It's not like you're like, oh no, I know where this is going. He's gonna die because of his addiction, and he just can't beat it. And that's the point of it, is the horrible grasp this can have on someone. It's not that as well. It's just he's just gonna keep falling off the wagon to no effect.
Exactly. Anyway, we'll move on. The plot kicks off while Jimmy is away from home, attending an AA meeting where we are first introduced to the fact he has a drinking problem. And Bobby's wandering around the woods walking their dog and trips over a pipe that's sticking out of the ground. And that pipe It glows green, shoots lasers, and makes her dog go crazy. And it very quickly, it doesn't take long, Bobby becomes obsessed with it, with this pipe in the woods. I guess particularly because it cures her dog's cataracts. Did you like the scene where they went to the vet? It was the craziest thing I've ever seen.
I don't remember specifically what was it that particularly stuck out for you.
It's not so much her going to the vet, but when she's leaving, the doctor's like, I don't know, your dog's cataracts are cured.
Yeah,
and she walks into the waiting room, and her dog obviously is like infected by an alien, and all the animals in the waiting room go insane. Like, that's the idea. It's like, oh, there's something wrong with this dog. But they start cutting to quick close-ups of all the animals in the room, and there's like some dogs, there's like a parrot, and then there's like an iguana, an owl, there's a loose cobra just on the ground moving amongst the animals, and then a huge bearded dragon's also there, and they're all just like in this tiny room. Everyone's got their like bearded dragons on leashes. I'm like, what are all of these animals doing in the same room?
It's funny, I didn't even track that. I was just like, oh, animals. Anyway.
So many. At some point they cut, there's just a snake going across the ground. I'm like, where's the snake from? Anyway, as she starts to dig around in the ground in the woods near her house, things start getting weird in old Haven. It's the idea is like as she digs, more strangeness happens around town.
Yeah. Although I don't know if it's done very well. Like, it's just like you get the sense that like she's starting to go a little odd and things are happening on, but I don't know how well this thing connects. I should say I do know. It doesn't connect it very well. It's, again, the idea that this is having an effect on the town. I think it takes like at least a half hour, 45 minutes to start kind of solidifying in any way.
Well, and also like there's this weird idea that sort of like the people the main storyline characters who all start getting a little crazy, they seem to have gotten close to her house, but eventually it's just like everybody starts going. So it's like, at first they're like, oh, it's kind of like an infection, but it's like, but not everybody was there, and eventually it's just like, don't worry about it. Everybody's crazy now. I'm like, oh, okie dokie.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think that's maybe the part that's weird is that they don't show the transmission particularly well.
Or you either have to like be like, it doesn't matter, like it's in this radius, everyone's starting to go crazy. I mean, what also doesn't help is like pretty much everyone in town goes crazy. With the exception of Sheriff Merrill, who's the sheriff of the town, who's in town the entire time, the same amount of time as everyone else, she's the only one who doesn't seem to start getting weird. Like, her storyline is that she's getting involved in a budding romance with her dead husband's former partner, who's also the chief of police in the other Stephen King spooky main town, Derry, a gentleman named Butch Dugan.
Okay, so I didn't realize he was in another Stephen King book, but I was like, okay. Because this was another thing. It's just like, why? I understand that they each have to have their own little storyline, but it also just almost detracts from the main story because it's something like, oh, she's going to go on a date and stuff with this other cop. I'm like, okay, who cares? And it's like, you don't need to. You don't need to care.
Yeah, it's crazy. We see her go to the beauty salon to get all dolled up for a date. It's very weird. And like, there's two things about this subplot I'll mention. One, all of the scenes with them are shot and scored like a Hallmark movie.
Okay.
They're like going to an ice cream parlor and like the most sappy music is playing and they're falling in love. And the other thing with the subplot that I was obsessed with, Jordan, is we see who works in Haven at the police station. It's Meryl and it's Becca. And then we see who works at the police station in Derry, and it's all men. So there's like an all-female police station, and there's an all-male police station, and they're dating.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. I didn't really think about that, but you have a point.
I was just like, I don't think this is on purpose. But I'm like, I'm very interested by this very gender segregated two police stations.
You mentioned an interesting thing as well, though, about the music, and I think it's a good point. The music does a lot of heavy lifting, especially in trying to set the tone of something ominous is coming, and I like because it doesn't always match with what's happening. Like, you'd have old Jimmy Smits like walks into a room and he's like, ugh, and then the music's like, I'm like, oh, what just happened? Nothing. It's because nothing is happening, but the music's like, no, don't worry. It's scary. It's scary, everyone.
Except with Meryl, it's romantic.
Except with Meryl.
And really the closest she comes for like maybe the first hour of this movie, maybe longer even, to connecting with the whole alien plot, because she doesn't go crazy like everyone else in town, is at some point while she's on a date with Butch, she sees the postman clearly cheating on her deputy with this postmistress. Like they see her, like them like coming out of the post thing, like flying over each other, and she sees that her like coworker and I guess underling and seeming to be her friend is being cheated on. And she doesn't do anything about it. She never mentions it. It's none of her business. She never reports back to the deputy that she saw it.
Maybe it's like a small town thing. She's just like, I'm not getting involved. None of my business.
None of my business. I'm falling in love with Butch.
Yeah, she's too distracted.
Fair enough. Anyway, moving on from Meryl, there's the child magician Hilly, and as you said, he's receiving encouragement from his grandfather to learn magic, and like his grandpa's buying him weird magic tricks and stuff. And he weirdly also, there's also this weird subplot because like his family works at a diner. Grandpa seems to live with the family, and the dad who like kind of runs a diner, he's like a little bit nebbish, but he's constantly like, both ragging on his son, but also ragging on the grandpa.
Yeah, he's like, grandpa's too nice to my kid. I'm like, yeah, he's a grandpa. Seems awesome.
He like turns to his wife. He's like, my house, my rules. Your dad's got to follow them. I'm like, what rules are we talking about?
Yeah, it is weird. The dad character is an interesting one because when he goes crazy, he doesn't really change at all. You're just like, yeah, he's kind of a jerk before.
That's true. He was already a jerk. He remains a jerk.
Yeah.
But we get to see Healy put on a magic show for his classmates. And it's really funny because we see this magic show. And then after it's over, we're told it didn't go well and Hilly's upset. But the magic show at class seemed to go really well. And it like climaxed in, I guess the trick didn't go quite correctly, but it climaxed with his teacher getting a face full of black ink, which I think would make you a hero. Like it's the ultimate prank to play on your teacher.
I thought the exact same thing. I think what they were trying to imply was that maybe not that the kids really liked it, but that he got in trouble for doing this to the teacher. So thus it didn't go well. But I agree. If you did a trick and the end up was that the teacher was the butt of a joke, I mean, like, yeah, you're doing well. You're doing well the next day at school.
Yeah, I was just like, no, this is the best thing that could have happened. I don't like when they cut away and Hilly's like, I'm so upset. I'm like, about what? Like that went perfectly. That couldn't have gone better.
It was his perfectionism.
But to that point, Hilly has gone to the woods at some point and seen the glowing green light out in the woods. Mm-hmm. And I guess it has followed him home. This is the idea of the infection that's never very clear. But he's gone home and he's gone to bed and he shares a room with his little brother. And that night, his little brother wakes up and he hears something in the closet. When he opens it, it's glowing green. The little brother opens the closet and there is like the worst, lowest budget monster I've ever seen in my life. It's just a man wearing a black spandex with like fake fingertips glowing green, and like it looks so bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point to like. Eventually, when we get to the second movie, you're gonna start seeing. I mean, we've said it's aliens. You're gonna start seeing them. They look, but up to that point, the special effects in this. And you have to obviously take it for what it is. It's a TV movie. They're not great. So like the glowing doesn't look great of the spaceship. When it zaps people like the dog or whatever, it doesn't look great.
This in particular though was surprisingly low rent in a movie that was already pretty low rent.
Fair enough.
And it didn't really come back to anything because it's not like the little brother deals with monsters in the closet. There's just that moment where they tried to go for a cheap scare, I guess. But what's really important here is that Hilly starts receiving telepathic instructions, theoretically from the Tommyknockers, on how to build a new magic trick. And he like enlists Grandpa to start buying him a lot of batteries so he can build some sort of wacky machine out of like I guess an old what do you call it, sewing machine.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And so when Hilly's birthday rolls around, he's going to perform his new tricks for his guests. And I will say, this character doesn't get a lot of screen time, but he's my favorite of the movie, is Hilly's friend, Ronnie Applegate.
Which one's he?
He's just a little kid with the biggest Coke bottle glasses you've ever seen.
Oh, right, yes.
He's just always kind of around. And during this magic thing, he's just like, I'm going to need a volunteer. Ronnie Applegate, why don't you join me? And Ronnie, they just cut to Ronnie sitting in a chair. He's just like, hell no. Hell no am I getting in that machine. I ain't doing it. I'm like, you tell him, Ronnie. You tell him.
During this magic trick, doesn't it seem like the parents aren't as supportive as they should be? Because he's doing this whole thing. Clearly, it means a lot to him. He's going to do this trick, and let's say a pretty good trick. It's
Yeah, he
like,
gets his little brother up there. He puts his little brother on this this platform, puts a sheet over him, and then his brother sinks into the platform and disappears.
yeah, it's sort of he gets bigger and bigger. He starts with like a can, and then he does something else. He keeps shows he can make things disappear, and he makes his brother disappear. And everyone kind of claps. They're like, "All right, let's time to go inside." I'm like, "No, no, like if you saw some actual kid do this thing, I'd be like, guys, let's get up on our feet and applause. Like this is very impressive."
No, he's an impressive magician, even without the alien tricks. So it's very funny when he makes his brother disappear. And that's the funniest part is he makes his brother disappear, and as soon as his brother disappears, all the adults stand up and say, "Well, let's go inside for a kick." I'm like, that's half of the trick. You have to wait till he brings them back. Like the trick's not over yet. They don't want to see the other half of the trick so badly that everyone gets up and leaves.
It's true. You think there'd be a part where they're looking behind them, like, where's he going to show up? He's going to show up. They're like, all right, end of this fun. Like, let's get inside. We paid $10 for this cake.
Yeah, we're going to go eat this cake. But the thing is, unlike the other objects, he'll use the machine to disappear and reappear. His little brother does not come back. His little brother has gone missing, essentially. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of where Sheriff Merrill comes a little bit more to the plot. Is she has to come out. She's got to go she's trying to search for this missing child. She recruits every senior citizen in Haven, apparently, because when they cut to the search party, it's like the oldest people you've ever seen in your life.
I noticed the same thing. It did seem like they're like, everyone that can help can. They're like, if you have to work, you can't come out. And they're like, well, I guess everyone over 65 is coming out.
And of course, they can't find him because he's been disappeared. And Healy starts hearing his little brother's voice in his head calling out to him from Tommyknocker land. And this causes Healy to get a brain tumor and fall into a coma, meaning that Grandpa has to take him to a hospital in Derry, and he's out of the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how this was connected, because I thought, is this going to be a thing where he's come into contact with the alien ship, and because he's using, quote unquote, alien powers or being helped by them, the horrible effect is that he's going to develop like a cancerous tumor? Was that? I'm like, that's what I thought maybe it was going to be the thing at the end, that all these people get all these benefits, but in this sort of monkey's paw thing, what's going to end up happening is they're all going to have cancer or some sort of ailments. But it's like, no, just him.
Just him, I know. It was very strange. No one else had any problem. I don't quite remember it, but I did read this while I was doing it. I vaguely brought up some memories from listening to the audiobook as I fell asleep. I believe at the end of the book, everybody dies.
Okay, sure.
But I don't know if it's of cancer.
But it was a weird thing because it feels like a lot of sort of threads in this TV movie. It feels connected, but also not. Like you're like, oh, it's going to have something to do with this alien. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But like, as you said, they sort of go, anyways, he's in the hospital. Don't worry about him. And it's like, okay, well, why did you introduce any of this? It's like, just because. It's stakes, is it? Not really.
Well, that's it. It sets up stakes for this kid character, which obviously I don't really want to see a kid have to run around doing things. But the implication is he's so guilty over losing his little brother that at some point he's going to redeem himself by getting him back. But after he disappears his little brother, he basically is out of the show. Like they put him in a hospital in a coma. So I'm just like, he has no arc at all.
Well, and again, what we were saying at the beginning, no one has an arc. It's weird, and maybe it's just an adaptation issue from the book, but you're right. All where you think things are going to go, and that's not necessarily a bad thing that things don't go where you anticipate them to, but there has to be some sort of connection between where a character ends and where they begin. And this, it just is like people are shot up into the air and they're just left up there.
Well, just like their stories just stop abruptly.
Yeah. Anyways, the kid's in the hospital now. That's all you need to know.
Anyway, Postman Crazy Millardo and his postmistress, they're still cheating on his wife, and they go on a fishing trip to get away from the wife. And while they're away in the woods making out, this is where they kind of get, I guess, infected or encounter the green light, which starts changing their lives as well. What we see very quickly, how it changed their lives, mostly it affects the postmistress in that she's inspired by the green light to build a Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse style invention that sorts mail.
You know what? That's actually great. I was trying to think of a way to describe it, but that's a great way of doing it. Everyone sort of, or not everyone, several people in this decide to start making inventions, and there's this idea that they have not only had an inspiration, it's more than that. They are inspired, but they also have gained an ability, whether it's a technical ability or an engineering ability to build things that are almost otherworldly, like not quite, but
built out of everyday objects.
yes, and it's always something that's like kind of helpful. Like I think later on they imply the guy in the diner, the dad in the diner, he wants to make a thing that makes BLTs faster. So it's sort of that thing where it's like he's inspired, but like the goal is perhaps not the biggest thing ever. But it's a goal that is very centered on their life. So like
yeah. But
what was it the old lady wanted to make her invention?
She made a silverware polisher.
That's right. So yeah, so everyone has like a thing that they're able to make that's probably outside of their technical means, but it's also isolated to their interest. Where it's like, because she's like, I'm gonna get rich with this silver polisher. I guess the joke being like, no, you're not.
Yeah, and they're all made out of like a bike tire with a rope tied to it and a mailbox that shoots mail. And like you said, it's also specific. I believe she says, I built a mail sorter only for the first class mail. And I'm just like, it's all just letters. Why can't it sort anything else?
I'll say this though, the one person though that like they're all like sort of exist in reality. Yes, they're all sort of like thrown together like garbagey looking, with the exception of old CSI lady, where hers is like the only one where you're like,
don't worry.
It's like, okay, this one is a hard one to explain.
What I did like though is after the postmistress shows Crazy Millardo what she's built, he's like, it sorts mail. It's made out of an old bike and like just flips things across the room. He looks at it. And he's just like, not bad for a woman.
And she's like,
he's such a cad. It's so insane.
And she's like, yeah, we should make out. I should say too, these characters, all they do is like make out. There's nothing else to their character, and they never seem to actually want to get any work done. It's just like they're so into each other. That's all they can do.
Yeah. But, well, there might be paradise at work. The postman's wife, Deputy Becca, she gets informed by the host of a dating show via a fourth wall breaking television broadcast that her husband is cheating on her. And the TV recommends only one solution. You gotta kill him.
Again, a kind of an interesting thing that like it's not clear whether she is starting to sort of lose her mind a little bit, or she's obviously being controlled in some way by the alien, but why it's happening through the TV where that didn't seem to be the connection for anyone else, I'm not sure. It's not like they're like, hey, this works really well, let's attack the whole team through their TVs because they're already a receptive audience. It's like not just this one woman.
Yeah, and I vaguely remember this chapter of the book. Like this to me was like a real vignette about a character I'd never seen before, who just like gets the idea in her head that her husband's cheating on her and like blows up the TV to kill him. And they like have like taken bits of it to build in here. Because the whole thing is she then does some sort of, I guess, like all the other inventors, she twists the electronics in the TV. So when Crazy Millardo comes home and goes to shut off the dating show, he's electrocuted by green lightning and then falls over dead.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I wasn't even sure it was her that had done it. Like, I think you're probably right, but I just was like, is it just the aliens doing this? Because it's not, I didn't see her be terribly active in it, but you're probably right.
You're not wrong. I don't think they showed her do anything, but I think that's what happened in the book, so I'm reading into it.
Mm-hmm. Because we do get to see him get electrocuted in like really cartoony style, but you're like,
do we see a skeleton? Okay. I feel like we see a skeleton, but I'm not sure we actually do.
I don't think we do. like a planes, trains, and automobiles sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a cartoon happening, so I think that's why I feel like that was happening.
Yeah, I think he just glows. Anyway,
let's get to the main character, Jimmy Smits. He's been out of town for a while when things are kicking off. Like, he's probably out of Haven for 80%, maybe not quite that, maybe 60% of the first part of the TV movie. Mm-hmm. And he's gone to a poetry reading that, as he says, might be his last chance to become a professional poetry man.
Poet, but it is interesting because everything is so, it's hard to describe how, I don't know how to say it. It's like nothing quite works until you're like, they're overly explaining some things and then other things they don't explain enough. Like it took me a while to realize I'm like, hold on, both of them are writers? But yes, he's a writer who's not doing great right now in his career. I'm assuming the implication is something to do with his alcoholism. I don't know if it's exactly connected in some way.
Well, he talks about it at AA, saying like this is his last chance. If he doesn't pull this off, he'll never work professionally. And I was just like, what a weird thing that like why like it seems like you have unlimited chances unless you're quitting or something.
Yeah, but I also I assume he's had an alcohol problem for a while, and he clearly was writing successful poems through said alcoholism. So I don't know if that's your problem.
Well, that's the other thing too, is when he gets the poetry reading, he's supposed to read a new work, but when they introduce him, they're like, "Hey, here's this guy I've got written down here. His last book, Racing Angel, made him the voice of 80s poetry." And I was like, "Oh, so you're already a very successful poet if you're known as the voice of 80s poetry."
That's the thing too. It's like, so you were an alcoholic. Didn't seem to affect your career at all. You're very successful. He's like, oh, if I do this next thing, I'm not going to make it. It's like, no, I think you can coast for a while.
Yeah, and what's crazy, he's supposed to read a new poem there. He gets up and he reads an old poem from his original book. But like the people in the audience, they start openly weeping. He gets a standing ovation. Like he tears the house down. He destroys the house. Like people are so beside themselves by what an amazing poet he is. And I was just like, yeah, just keep doing this for the rest of your career if you're having trouble writing. Like you're a huge success.
What you're supposed to get as the audience is, oh, but he didn't do his new stuff. His new stuff is either incomplete or not very good, or he's just not confident in it. So like that's a real problem. But you're right. It's a weird thing. You think the scene would be him getting up. He's sort of having this fanfare for him being there, and what he does is he reads his poem and it goes poorly, and then he has to kind of sit there by himself going, God, I need a drink. It's the only thing that I used to be able to have me be able to write, and I was successful then. But it's not what it is. So it's just like, you're like, none of this doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's just, he leaves that. He goes to the after party for the poetry convention, and the publisher who organized it all gets mad at him because he didn't read a new poem. And I'm just like, well, it seems like he did pretty well. I don't know what you're mad about. Like your paying audience clearly got their money's worth. But he's so upset that she's mad at him for not having a new poem. That's when he's just like, fuck it, I'm getting drunk.
Yeah, I'm getting drunk and sort of like burning all the bridges around me.
And this is the most sober drunk acting I've ever seen. He doesn't seem that drunk at all. And he gets so mad at a random guy there who he hears talking favorably about nuclear energy. He won't stand by it. He won't stand by and hear a person talk favorably about nuclear energy.
Well, I'll say that is one thing that actually rang true. If you've ever had to be in a room with someone who gets drunk and then is very focused on something, I thought that was actually pretty good. I did like the idea of being like very angry about something that is not relevant to your life at this moment.
Hey, buddy, you ever heard of Chernobyl?
That's right. Maybe Chernobyl had just happened. It was like right in the news, you know?
I do think when the book was published, that is the case. So I do also recall this from the book, is that like he gets in a big fight over nuclear energy. I was like, what a weird fight.
So if this had been written in like the early 2000s, you'd be like 9/11.
Anyway, he punches this guy, then jumps out a window, and next time we see him, he's waking up on a beach out of, I guess, a blackout he had.
Yeah. The implication is he drank way too much, and he's sort of like, oh, I did it again. Like I pushed things too far, which again, they're implying that not only his career, but perhaps his life, it's straining on his marriage because of this drinking, is having this negative effect, but they don't show it again. Like, it's like, I'm not saying that waking up at a beach on a blackout is a good thing, but to your point you made originally, what are the consequences of this? Oh, he has a harder time getting home.
He'll never work again, Jordan.
You don't see him never working again. You don't see him having any fallout from his publisher. You don't see any fallout from the public. Nothing. So it's like, okay, so it's a big deal. He woke up at the beach. That's uncomfortable.
Well, he's unhappy. He's like, my career's over. And then he hitchhikes back to Haven, and he catches the ride with a man who never reappears, but he's in it for a significant amount of time. He's a traveling salesman who works for Mr. Suck It Up, and tells you all about it. I'm just like, so this is going to be a character, right? And I'm like, no, you never see this man again.
No, never get. You just see him to just drop him off like, anyways, thanks for letting me waste some time.
Literally, he's only there so that Jimmy Smits can be like, hey, I've got a plate in my head from when I had an accident one time. I hope that doesn't affect alien rays or anything.
Yeah, it was funny because it's an important plot point, and you need it to be out there, but it's just done in the most clumsy way possible, where it doesn't come up organically. It's just like, what was the conversation? He's like, anyways, so funny story, I got a plate in my head. He's like, yeah, so like sometimes I get radio transmissions. You're like, oh, that's very particular, and you're and it's like the first thing you think as an audience member, because audiences are savvy to seeing these sort of formulaic sort of tropes. You're just like, well, I guess that's important.
Yeah. Well, you immediately know it's like, I guess the aliens won't affect him. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say though, later on when you see his plate kind of come out of his head again, that was my favorite special effect.
When it bulges out of his forehead a little, and the aliens try to zap him. I like that too.
Yeah.
Anyway, he gets home to find Bobby has become completely obsessed with digging up this glowing green stuff, an alien ship in the woods. And she's doing it because we see very quickly, she's just essentially high. Like, she's like euphoric. She's like clear. This is her addiction, like his alcoholism.
Exactly.
Which is very funny because Jimmy Smits, you think his character would like clue in more quickly as an addict who keeps trying to recover, that like he doesn't seem to like ever piece it together.
No, and he also doesn't even really bring that up. Maybe like it doesn't come like as a reflection to himself, and he's like, oh no, this is what I'm like. Something's not right. He just is like, she's acting funny, but it doesn't really affect their relationship that much.
No, I mean, he starts helping her dig. They get in a fight over his drinking. They have sex. Like, it's just like there's like business as usual.
Multiple times. They have sex multiple times in this. People are having sex all over the place. This is a real horny book.
Well, that's what's so weird too. This is like talking about the tone of this movie is like sometimes it's a cartoon, sometimes it's a Hallmark movie, sometimes it verges into like a bit of an erotic thriller occasionally, just for these, but only for like these two. So each storyline has its own tone that does not like coalesce into anything.
Yeah, I'd agree.
But Bobby, as she's been interacting the most closely with the alien ship, she started developing mind reading powers. She's like fixed their hot water heater with alien technology, so it glows green. She's built a telepathically operated typewriter that's run by an accordion.
Yeah, I'll get back to that in a second. But I think hers is probably, at least for me, the most interesting of the character arcs, because she's the one who is the closest connected to this thing. She finds this thing. She's now, for all intents and purposes, addicted to unveiling it and digging it and revealing it. And then it's slowly having effect. She's able to start fixing things she couldn't before. And it's things that makes like things that actually work better. And you can see the monkey paw thing, that what's happening is she's doing all these things, but you can see a bit of a deterioration in her. I think her like she ends up like losing a tooth, like it's just like rotting out, and her skin starts. It's not a great effect, but you can see her skin is kind of peeling. I think it's supposed to be that it's rotting.
Well, she looks pretty haggard as the show goes.
Yes, she's looking worse and worse. You could see like it's clearly sucking the life out of her. But I do like, yeah, as you mentioned, her invention. I didn't see that it was an accordion, but it sort of does have that funny appearance of all these knickknacks put together. But hers, at first, I thought what it was she sort of dictated, and this thing was writing it down. Like, and when we saw it, like it's a self-perpetuating writing machine sort of thing. And I thought it was like she'd given it dictation and it started catching up and writing all these ideas that she had, but it's not. It's taking like a book idea from her subconscious and then just writing it down. So she's like, isn't this great? I don't even have to like try, and it's writing this great book.
Yeah,
and
right, she sleeps.
And I thought there'd be a scene, because later on he goes and he takes the work and he's like, I guess I'll just read this book she's writing. And I thought it was going to be like the thing where, it's that shining moment where he sees it and it's like, an insane thing that's being written. But no, it's great.
Yeah, it's the best thing she's ever worked. It's the best work she's ever done.
It's a great work of fiction.
And yeah, so Jimmy Smits is seeing all this. He's not affected by the alien ship. He's seeing all this happening, and none of it bothers him. They just sort of like go about their daily lives. They're like, hey, it's the 4th of July. Why don't we head down to the festivities in town? And they get there, And it's like the end of part one. Sheriff Merrill's on the podium. She's giving a speech and she's like, hey, is a young boy missing in our town? Absolutely. Is our mailman dead? 100%. Did my deputy get locked up in an insane asylum for killing her husband? You know she did. But you know what matters? America. And this small town. So let's all have a great time and watch these fireworks. And then the fireworks start going off and they're all green. And like the whole town's looking up at them like, ooh, alien, green alien fireworks or something. And Jimmy Smith's like, something seems strange in town.
Yeah. So I would agree with everything you said. But with the fireworks, so they're green. Is it just for the viewer to know the alien has entirely encompassed this town now, or is it that the alien is using the fireworks to infect everyone, or is it none of the above?
I think it's your first one. I think it's supposed to be like, you're like supposed to look at them, they're turning green, and that's to remind you, the viewer, that's like, oh, there's a lot of green stuff, and that's related to the alien. Look how everyone in town seems to be a little bit like they're all looking a little crazy-eyed now, and Jimmy Smith is noticing it. But you're right, like it's like they reached the end of part one and we're like, we have no climax to the end of part one. They're like, I don't know. I guess the reveal is the entire town's gone crazy. But it's like we already kind of knew, like they just didn't have an ending.
Well, you're right. And I think part of it is like, it'd be exciting if there was fireworks. And now it's kind of all culminated in this thing. It's like, but they didn't build it as time went on. And part of, I think, the issue is, like you're saying, the structure of the book might have been these vignettes. But in terms of this movie, there's no momentum. There's no inciting incident that becomes another incident that builds on something else. It's just like, oh yeah, these things are happening. Here's to meet these characters. This person's having an affair. This person's doing this thing. Anyways, things happen. You're like, okay, but what's the propulsion here? What is, what am I working towards? What's the excitement? And it feels like it's just scene after scene after scene after scene, and they're not really connected.
Yeah, if this is the halfway point, like between the two parts of the series, you would think this would be like the big midpoint turn where there's a big reveal and you're like shocked and you're going to turn next week. But it's kind of just like, just more of the same. Like people have been affected. We don't like, it's a little bit weird and it's a little bit ominous, but I don't know. Who knows what any of it means? I guess maybe tune in tomorrow and find out maybe. I don't know.
And knowing what I do now after seeing the second half of this and the reveals that you happen, I'm like,
spoilers.
I'm just saying, I think you could have finished this on a more exciting thing. I'm just like, as we know, if this is going to be aliens, finish on an alien. Do a reveal and be like, can you believe it? An alien of some sort. Even if that's not the structure of the book, do something that's exciting that makes me want to watch the second half. Because I'll say the second half's not as bad as the first, but the first half's really quite slow and boring.
Yeah, I mean, it is never like explicitly stated. I think I obviously read the book, so I kind of understood where it was going. And I think you, as a savvy human being, you're leaning toward alien being the mystery thing here. But I don't know if anyone at any point during the first part ever is just like reveals like it's aliens. Like it's never really made clear.
Yeah, but I'm thinking maybe they should have. Maybe
that
would have
absolutely.
made this.
I don't disagree. That's what I mean. It's just like they never reveal. So it's like, why not do it now?
Imagine you were watching this in whatever it was, 1993. You wouldn't come back for a second part, would you?
You only had ABC. It was going to be on the next day anyway. What are you going to do?
Fair enough. You're absolutely right. I forget what time it was. Would I have watched it? Probably.
All right, Jordan. Well, before we get to ratings, I just want to make one final note. Something I caught as I was like doing my notes and I wrote it down. The naming in this movie, I realized, was so funny and like I think probably what you should never do when you write names for characters. But there's Bobby, and then there's her dog Petey. And then there's the kid, Hilly. And then there's the deputy, Becky. And then there's little bro, Davy. And there's another guy named Barney. I'm like, how many guys are we going to have with an E? Like, where's that Tommy? Like, how many more people can we shove in here? I'm like, it's so many people with the same sounding, like, end of a name.
I noticed the same thing when I was writing down all the characters' names. I'm like, interesting choice.
Yeah. And I mean, they call him Guard or Jim in the show. But I was calling him Jimmy because it's Jimmy Smith. So it's just one more for me. All right, Jordan, unless you have any final notes, do you want to get into rating part one of the Tommyknockers?
Yeah, and I'll just say, like, I think probably even listening to this podcast, it feels a little incomplete. Like, it feels like we haven't even really started talking about the movie.
Absolutely.
And that's the feeling you have when you watch it. It's just like, it's almost all set up. And I timed
Feel free to start anytime, movie.
Yeah, it's like, right. It's like we've just spent an hour talking about this thing, and the movie hasn't really got going. And it is the problem that we mentioned at the beginning of like, oh, this thing's gonna be 3 hours. It's like it doesn't need to be. I'm sure the book was probably 600 pages. It's like, but trust me, there was stuff to cut, and there's characters to cut, and there's like you could streamline this and make it a little bit more interesting. But I don't. It's hard to rate this because it's like rating the first chapter of a book and being like, how good's the book? It's like, well, I don't know, but from just what I saw on TV and as a TV movie, I can't give this any more than a 2 out of 10.
2 out of 10. I don't disagree. This is, as you've said, you could edit this down into one movie so of all the times we've said that, and we said that a lot on this show, that you could edit one of these shows, this is the most I truly believe I've ever seen anything that could have easily been streamlined into one like hour 20, one tight hour 20, not good necessarily, but tight hour and 20
No, I'd
minutes.
agree. Yeah. I think you're right. Like we say that all the time. Like you can edit it. It's an easy thing to say, and some things it's hard. But like there's literally characters and storylines that you could entirely take out, and it would have no effect. No effect other than the time. Just be like, guess what? We're never gonna find out about the sheriff and her relationship with the other guy. Take it out. Doesn't matter. Or
I mean, you could cut it down. You could cut it down to 2 minutes and still get the point across. You don't need to see them go to the
Agreed.
malt shop. You don't need to see her go to the hair salon and get her hair done. And you're like, can you believe you're going on a date? It's like, I do, because you told me.
I should say one thing on that scene that we didn't mention that made me laugh was the characters when she's getting her hair done. They're like, don't want you to look like a floozy, and that made me laugh. Anyways,
The language in it too is like, it's one of those things like Stephen King writes in a very specific style that doesn't translate well, but also like the writer's trying to go for real like folksy small town, but it's just like, don't look like a floozy, or like the postman is such a scumbag. It's like, okay, pretty good for a woman. It's just like, no one talks like this.
Grandpa also says engine, which was like, ooh, Grandpa, not good.
It's trouble. I'm giving it a 1.
Okay. Hey, we're pretty close.
I mean, it's bad. It was such a
really
tough
bad.
watch.
It's a funny thing because like I really went in going like, this will at least be fun, right? Like I had a feeling it wasn't gonna be great, but like it'd be fun. But there's no sense of real whimsy. It's not like entertaining and that sort of like, oh, it's so funny, it's bad. It's just like it's boring bad, which is the worst kind of bad.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Obviously, I keep saying I sort of listened to most of the book, some of the book, as I fall asleep. And I remember like fun sequences in it, and it's just like a weird movie or a weird book with like weird vignettes of alien, like of weird people building weird contraptions. This has no fun to it. No fun whatsoever. And after watching like Langoliers, which wasn't a great movie, but like I had way more fun with that. Like watching Belky's dad yell at him, and it's Stephen King in a weird flat, and he's sweating on a plane. Like that was so much fun. This not fun at all.
No, and I agree. And I think the interesting thing that you said, I love how the lack of authority we both have, that you kind of listened to a book while sleeping and I never did. But regardless of that, I like that they could have just leaned into it. I don't know if it would have made it a better movie, but at least made it maybe more fun of like, look, do you want to have the thing be really cartoony? That if you want each of the scenes to be incredibly different and feel weird, then just lean into that. Make that a weird movie where it's a funny, weird town, and the tone is, we know the tone's all over the place because we're going to lean into it, as opposed to everything's like half in this. And like, again, you have an actor like Jimmy Smits, good actor. You would not be able to tell from this. Like if you were an agency and you saw this on his reel, you'd be like, ooh, I don't think we'll take him, because he looks like he doesn't know what he's doing.
Well, Jordan, that about wraps it up for this, I think, first part of Tommyknockers. So let's wrap it up, and people can come back next week and hear about the better half of Tommyknockers. But if you at home have any thoughts, if you were watching Tommyknockers live and you couldn't turn it off, you're at the edge of your seat, you can email us at continuingdrag@gmail.com. And, of course, on Instagram, Twitter, or X, or whatever it's called now, and Facebook, you can see clips from the Tommyknockers. Part 1 has some clips. I will say that it has some clips. Not as many. They're not some great clips, but there'll be some clips up there. It's a slow part.
You get a what's her face, I think, takes a tooth out. Maybe it's in this first half, or is it the second half? I can't remember.
You'll see those dogs at the
right.
bearded dragon at the vet for sure.
There could be a compilation of those two people kissing.
No, maybe. Oh, we'll definitely see her machine she made.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But you can find all that at Continuum Drags, the handle on our social media accounts. That about wraps it up. So, listener, thank you for joining us. And Jordan, see you soon.
See you again.
Can't get enough Continuum Drag? Commission a bonus episode for charity.
Want us to watch an episode we missed after using the escape pod or during a best of run? No problem.
Is there an episode of a series we've never watched or a TV movie you want us to cover? You got it.
Wish we'd comment on your favorite movie, content, or other weird media? Sure, why not?
All you have to do is make a donation to one of the charities selected by past guests on our website.
We suggest a donation of $50 per television hour of content we're watching, but everyone's means are different, so give what you can.
Get all the details about bonus episodes for charity on our website, continuumdrag.podbean.com, or follow the links in our social media profiles.
Continuum Drag is recorded in Ontario, Canada, and Seoul, South Korea. Theme music by James Rick Seidler, produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.